Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Trail Talk Highpointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and the highpointer we're speaking with today is Skye Marthaler, the creator of the Rooftops of America YouTube channel. Skye, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yes, and I have to say this is kind of long awaited because my last question that I always ask guests is, do you have any books, documentaries, or podcasts about outdoor adventure that you would recommend to listeners? And people have said the Rooftops of America. And that's what made me look at your YouTube channel. That's when I was like, who is he? I got to get him on the podcast. And I didn't know how to contact you for a long time, but we were able to connect through the Apex to Zenith magazine, and here we are. So we'll get into the Rooftops of America YouTube channel and the making of the YouTube channel in the latter portion of the episode. But first, I want to know what got you started in the outdoors.
So I grew up on a dairy farm in north central Wisconsin. So being in the outdoors was just growing up. I have 6 sisters, so if I wanted to escape 6 sisters, you go to the woods. I think, when I was a kid in the 80s, living 12 miles away from the closest town, you just played outside. And that just has always carried through. That love of the outdoors, that comfort in the woods, especially the Northwoods of Wisconsin. So for me, no matter where I've been, I've always liked to explore and sort of compare and contrast of whether it's say it's El Yunque in Puerto Rico, the national rainforest down there, and compare it to let's compare this to where I grew up in Wisconsin. This woods is not like the other one. But yeah, and I had an uncle who really liked to camp and canoe, and so that was just piled on. And there was this natural inclination I always had to explore places and go to places that are slightly off the beaten path. And, where will this trail take me? And I've always found that rewarding. If you were going to go to the highest point in Wisconsin, Timms Hill, you may very well drive by my parents' farm.
Wow.
So it's about 30 miles away from where I in high school, I swear we ran cross country up on Timms Hill against Phillips and one of their conference meets. Go Lumberjack Conference. So, but I had been to Timms Hill as a kid. I knew it was important, but it never was significant, if that makes sense. Like it hadn't become significant. But to me, hey, this is just where we are. This is where we live. When I left home to go in the Marines when I was 18, and that sense of adventure always just sort of carried on. So whether I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, going out and, checking out the jungle on that island, or, enjoying my time in the desert, etc., it was always there. And then my sister, when I was getting ready to get out of the Marine Corps, I needed a job. And my sister was working at a YMCA camp up in Boulder Junction, Wisconsin, called Camp Manitowish. And I wanted, to me, when she's like, you should go become a camp counselor, it would be really cool. You already know how to canoe, you like camping. And so that was, I think, this really great transition from the Marine Corps into civilian life, but also it really rekindled this sense of outdoor adventure, leading these trips up at Manitowish on Boulder Lake there. And it was it's still one of my all-time favorite places that I've ever spent time. One of my all-time favorite jobs was the 6 years I worked at camp. If you're ever up there and you see the orange canoes, that's Camp Manitowish. It's a great place.
Small world. I have been up there. So I grew up around Chicago, and we used to vacation either in like northern Wisconsin or northern Michigan in those summers. And one summer we went to Manitowish Waters and we stayed at a cabin called the Red Feather Lodge. And I could look out my kitchen window or the kitchen window of the cabin and see those orange canoes. And we used to take a little paddle boat to that island. Do you remember that little island there? You guys used to go there too. I mean, I remember seeing those.
There was a swim challenge.
Oh, you guys swam there?
There was a swim challenge to swim from the waterfront out to the island and back.
That is wild. I want all the listeners to know how small this world is right now.
Small world. So,
we were like less than a mile away.
And you would have been there, if it was like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
I was working at Manitowish.
Oh my gosh.
It's wild. That's wild. It is so wild.
That is wild. Yeah, Red Feather Lodge was like, there were a couple cabins there, and then there was like a little beach, and we went with like extended family and everything. We had the cabin that was like right on that point, like the closest one to the island. It's the only way I know how to describe it. And they didn't have a TV there, and like that was one of the rules. You couldn't have TVs, which is fine. You know, we were outside, just there was enough to do where you didn't need a TV.
Yeah, summers at camp were fun. I have fond memories, and I still have many really good friends from my Manitowish experience. I can even still sing, like if you wanted me to sing Break Out the Oars right now.
Wait, you guys had a camp song?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. And you would sing it paddling in. But maybe that's for the sequel. That's how we hook them, bring them back for the next round. Skye sings camp songs.
That's cool. Well, I just said that because it reminds me of that Nickelodeon show, like Camp Anawana, we hold you in our heart. You remember that one?
Break out the oars, course set for Manitowish. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, that was fun. So let's talk about highpointing. How did you start? Obviously, you were running on Tim's Hill. When did you start discovering other high points?
So, something to know about me is I like lists. I love...
Oh, you and every other high pointer.
I love to be able to just check things off.
Yep.
I got into highpointing because I was bored, is how I sort of describe it. I was looking for something new to do. For a while, I had been doing triathlon. So, I did Ironman Wisconsin in Madison, and other half iron, tri distance, sprint distance, the whole works. And I really enjoyed it. And then I got hit by a car.
Oh my gosh!
And that sort of put a real damper on my bicycling, the desire to do it.
Did you get hit while you were riding your bike?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's funny because looking back on it, it was one of these things where I could look at the bike. I just didn't have the desire to ride it anymore. It just wasn't something. It was this really weird thing where it's like that's something that used to bring me so much joy. And then looking at it, I was like, there was just this sort of mental thing, like, I just don't want to do that. And so I needed something different. And I was driving back for my 20-year class reunion. It was August of 2013. And I had was living in Blacksburg, Virginia at the time. And driving back to good old Medford, Wisconsin. And the route I was taking was on Interstate 70. And I've been driving for a while. I'm bored. And I cross over the state line and I see the sign that says Hoosier Hill, 10 miles, Indiana State High Point. And I need a break. And I'm like, well, why not? Why not go check this out? Because it's a state high point and it's right there. I've got time. I need to get out of the car for a bit, walk around. And so I just took the turn, headed north. And of course, if you haven't, for listeners out there that have not had the joy of experiencing Hoosier Hill yet, I'll put it this way. It's usually not the high point you would start with if you want to rope somebody into this journey of high pointing. And I get there, pull off park next to the cornfield, walk into the little grove, see the stone. And for me, though, it was like almost throwing a light switch. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, for me, that was super cool. Like, I'm like, oh, State High Point. Well, of course, Tim's Hill, I'm like, well, that one's, I'll go visit that one again. And then a couple quick searches later, by that end of, on the way back from the class reunion, because I literally drove up there for the weekend, did the class reunion, went to Tim's Hill. Actually, I went to Tim's Hill, then the class reunion. And then on the way back, I'm like, well, I'll pick up Ohio. Campbell Hill is on the way. And I picked that one up. And I'm like, once I got back to Blacksburg and I really took some time, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm living right in the heart of like the Southern Six-Pack. So here's West Virginia, Kentucky, Mount Ryan. And so I couldn't have asked. I sometimes feel like if I'd been living like in, say, Wichita, Kansas, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But because there was such a cornucopia of riches, let's say, for High Points where I was living, it just made sense to continue. And, when I looked at the list, I was so excited at the diversity of it. Mm-hmm. Like, it totally clicks off all the weird little things that I love. Like, it's not just a bunch of big mountains. It's everything. It's so almost idiosyncratic. It's the word that always pops in. Like, Ebright Azimuth. What other list are you going to get where a place like Ebright Azimuth is in the same conversation as, I don't know, Denali? Yeah. It is with State High Points. And so that for me was the mystique. And I was like, I'm going to do this. This is going to be my thing. And it has been ever since 2013. Wow. And I've never regretted it. It's one of the best adventures I've ever done. You're right. That's a perfect way to describe it. It's one of the best adventures. Absolutely. Do you high point with anyone else, or do you do all these solo? In the beginning, it was dependent on, availability. So when I was just high pointing and not doing anything else, just high pointing, there was only one that I went with a buddy, and that was my friend Dan Mayella. We went to Mount Rogers, and we did that one together. But every other one, like, that was all just drive, do it, enjoy the place for what it is, and that. Just roaming around the country, driving around, checking things out, going to places that are off the beaten path. You could call it pretty much a solo adventure when I first started. Okay. Now, you have, I think, a deeper understanding of a lot of the high points than a lot of us do, which is why you're the perfect host for your YouTube channel. When I ask guests what their favorite peaks are in different regions, they'll often name a favorite peak, maybe not for the peak itself, but the experience that they had on that peak or on that hike. So I want to know, from your experience, knowing what you know about these high points, was there any particular high point that stands out? Maybe were you able to really feel the history of one of the high points while you were hiking it? So there's two answers to that question. When I was just high pointing, the one where I felt the most magic was Mount Rogers. I've always, that one was, there's just something about that one that I really, really enjoy. But when I started this series and I started really researching and digging into things, the series also is when I started doing some peaks, particularly the larger ones out west, with a team, at least with one person, sometimes more. And that changed the experience as well. And plus, throw on that all the production elements too. But I think, for what it's worth, Guadalupe Peak in Texas is still one of my all-time favorites. It's an episode I actually want to go back and refilm, because I feel at the time I was close to where I wanted it to be, but it was still sort of a proto episode. Like, if I would do it today, there'd be more depth, a lot more I'd go into more depth, because that area is fascinating. And Guadalupe Peak is just this really cool high point. It's this giant, ancient ocean reef that just sits in this desert, rising high. When you look at it from the west and the sun's going down, it's like an impressionist painting come to life. It would be Monet's dream. I mean, I know I don't have a single bit of artistic talent when it comes to painting, but man, that peak, I learned to be a painter to paint that peak.
Wow.
Because it just it's incredible. And I have a lot of fond memories of when Brett and I filmed that, like just the experience of just doing that peak. Everything from driving across the desert to get there from El Paso, like at 4:30 in the morning, and the full moon is out, and it's so bright that you basically didn't need headlights if you didn't want them, to, sitting behind the little bush on the summit because the wind is just howling, and we're drinking a St. Arnold's beer. Tucked down, trying to stay out of the wind, knowing full well we have to get up and film stuff. But yeah, it was that one. That one for me is an all-time favorite. Mount Rogers is in the same bucket for that earlier answer, but yeah, that one.
A lot of people say Mount Rogers, and I'm actually going there at the end of April.
Mount Rogers actually there's a part of it. I won't give it away. I won't spoil it, but we'll have to talk about it. There's a part there that is one of my all-time favorite things. So I'll be curious to hear your experience.
No, tell me.
Okay. So you'll go, if you're going at the end of April, you might get the rhododendrons in bloom, which would be pretty cool. Like
okay.
Spring. But that's not the part. The spruce forest, the red spruce forest, as you go into it, it is otherworldly. It's super quiet, almost eerie on how quiet that summit area can be. Like, hiking through that forest, you expect to see, it's one of these places where you're like, oh wait, there goes Bilbo and the dwarves. Like, it's got that mystical feel. I'm not really a spiritual person, but that's a place where you could convince me that the veil between the magic and reality is awfully thin. So that last third of a mile hike up to the summit is one of my all-time favorites. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I've been reading a lot about it since I'm going there. And everyone always writes about the ponies and the Appalachian Trail. And then they say, yeah, and then you get into the forest and there's a rock and there's a summit, and then you just turn around.
Oh, I love the forest. I think I even talked about it in the episode. Like, it's one of my all-time favorite experiences. It's just, and it's, having been there twice, I think it's, like, I've had the same experience there twice. So part of me is like, I go a third time, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen again.
I always ask guests about high points that maybe didn't go according to plan. And I'm interested in your answer because you have to plan so intricately each high point that you do, in that you write a script, and
Sure.
the logistics are, I think there's a little more coordination involved maybe in your high points, because you're bringing up gear and probably another person to film you. And then you get down and there's editing, and it's a production. So,
Yep.
so what were some of your productions that didn't go according to plan?
So they've all been learning experiences. There's never been a single one where I didn't walk away, where I didn't learn something that paid off dividends. The first one that I clearly remember where everything sort of went off the rails was Black Mesa, Oklahoma. For the driest place in the state, it rained almost nonstop while we were filming. To the point where if you listen to the episode, you can hear the rain. We've actually got a bounce card above the camera to try, because it was coming down. It's the plus side is we learned that, hey, we can shoot at anything, and we will
Sure.
shoot at anything, because we got to get it. We have to get it. We can't wait it out. We don't have an extra day or two. We have to shoot. And so you're going to get what you get. So you got to be prepared for that. And that was the one where we learned that we can be prepared for it. And we can deal with the adverse conditions. And it can be frustrating, but it's only frustrating if you let it be frustrating. So that one was that was a huge boost of confidence that we were able to pull it off. Though at the time, more than a few curse words were thrown around. And of course, in a classic twist, it's not a twist, but in a classic coincidence, once we finished, like literally as we got back to the car, the sun came out, because of course it did. So, but the one personally, my worst high pointing experience was Nevada. That was a bad day.
It didn't seem like it on the video.
Oh, that's called acting. No, the hike, I had to sleep in O'Hare Airport the night before because my flight was horribly delayed. Well, not the night before, 2 nights before, because we stayed at Queen's Mind the night before we stepped off. So 2 bad nights of sleep. I was dehydrated. I was suffering from a bit of altitude sickness. It was just 50 feet below the summit. I'm trying not to lose my lunch. It just was a bad day. And it wasn't just a bad day for me. I think everybody that day, Brett, Eric, Amy, none of us were happy by the time we finished. But at the same time, that area is so visually appealing. I love the high desert as a biome, just in general. For me, it's incredible. So, despite having those issues, we still pulled off good production. We still knew what we had to do. We still were able to get the shots we needed. I was still able to put on a brave face, let's call it. Now that you should, if you ever see it again and you see me closing it out, and here we are in the summit, I feel miserable. I feel absolutely terrible, but give me a moment. There is a bit of acting that goes in with it. Mm-hmm. So, but Black Mesa and Boundary, for different reasons, really ended up being, both of them were teachable moments. Learned a lot, and both were a little more rough than I would have ever expected them to be.
Well, I think this is a good time to segue into your YouTube channel. So for the listeners who don't know about the Rooftops of America, can you explain what the channel is?
Sure. So Rooftops of America is an exploration of U.S. state and territory high points. And it's not just a guy going up the high point. I want to unpack the stories behind these places, whether that's the geological story, whether it's the prehistory story, whether it's the modern day history, the culture that is around these places. Basically, the entire gamut of these high points. These are places that have this title because of how we draw lines on a map. And there are events that happen around there, some more notorious than others. And I feel they're worth study. I feel it makes going to that place a more rich experience for potential visitors. The gist of the channel was always to be about sharing that experience and encouraging people to get out, to step out the door, because if a guy like me can do it, you can do it. And just, there's so much. There's so many amazing stories just across the country, and I wanted to really highlight these because I felt, one, this is one of my passions, but two, man, some of the stories here are just incredible.
How did you go from I want to explore these high points to it's going to be a YouTube channel, it's a production, let's get the camera, let's get the lights, I'm going to write a script, let's go?
So I, at the time, was living in Nashville. And Nashville's a super creative city. If you're into any of the arts, Nashville's a great scene. And for me, I was doing photography. And I, on a Craigslist ad, they needed a photographer to go to this event to shoot photographs of up-and-coming country music singers. So how does this get to Highpointing? Give me a moment. I'll get us there. And I went, did some photography work, met a couple singers. One of them asked me if I wanted to help shoot a music video. And said, I don't do video, but sure, why not? And there I met another fellow, a director, named Brad, who figured we should shoot something. And I was like, sure. And he sent me a script, which I then punched up. And we filmed this. I dare not even call it a B movie. Like, we filmed this thing on a shoestring budget. It was a weird little sci-fi movie called Kaleidoscope. And over the course of a summer, we filmed it. And I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day. I'd love it if it did. It is a weird little thing. But, okay, so we're halfway through this story. And then we started our next project together, and that actually, we got about halfway into it and it fell off the rails. And in the shambles of that, I was really sort of bummed out that, and frustrated that this thing wasn't going to get to fruition. And so here I am doing high points still. And I came to this conclusion. I'm like, I want to control my own project. I want to go do something for me that it's not going to, if it falls off the rails, it's because it fell off because of me. Like, not have to rely on anybody else. I've got the tools. I believed at the time I had the talent. And I had the motivation. And I decided that, you know what? I haven't done Arkansas yet. Why don't I write something up? And why don't I just turn the cameras on and film it? Tell a story about this place. Do it like a documentary. And 3 minutes, 45 seconds later, you have this little thing about Arkansas. And I was so proud of that. And I still really am, actually. I shouldn't slight my earlier efforts, because that really lit a fire. Mm-hmm. And I put it out there, and I then just kept going, knowing full well that I'd already done 20 state high points and I'd have to go back and do all of them again. But it was super rewarding for me to, one, explore a new medium, learn a lot about filming, and learn a lot about writing. I'd written scripts before, but I'd never really written this much. At the time, my job wasn't going as well as I would have liked, so this project provided a lot of personal validation too. And I've stuck with it ever since.
So I have some guests on the show who like to do state high points, obviously, and then also county high points. And then there's national park high points. There's city high points. And then they do national monument high points, borough high points in New York City. And you explore the planetary high points. How did you get into that?
So, at one point, I was doing April Fool's related things, and I might still do another. I have another idea I might do for April Fool's. And one year I just decided, like the first year I ever did it, it was, what was it? I think the April Fool's episode was 10 high points for people who are scared of high point or scared of heights. And the next year I was like, maybe I should do high pointing of the moon. And so I wrote this thing about the highest point on the moon. And I found Space Engine, which is a program. I think you can get it on Steam now. I know you can't get it on Steam because I have it on the other computer, but originally it was its own thing. And I love watching space documentaries, Neil deGrasse Tyson, even the old Carl Sagan Cosmos, and I'm like, I'll just try to do it like that. And I wrote it and I put it out there, and in a stroke of unintended genius, let's call it, I left it open at the end saying, the next stop, we're going to Mercury. Something of that. We're heading to the closest planet to the sun. Never intending necessarily to go back to it. It was a standalone thing. And then March of 2020 happened. The pandemic happened. And all my plans for that summer were basically brushed aside like everybody else's. And I was like, how am I going to keep my channel going? And I realized, I was like, wait a second. This is the perfect way to keep things going. Let's just spin off a series on Rooftops of the Solar System, we'll call it. I'm not going to even get too original with the name. I'm just going to go with what's working. And my son was super into astronomy at the time. He still is to an extent, but he was really into it then. And I figured, I can kill like a bunch of birds with one stone here. I can, put something out that Magnus will really enjoy. This is an easy way to, if I knew now what if I knew then what I knew now, I don't know if I'd call it easy, but it was really cool to get back into it. And that's how the whole solar system series came about. Was literally I needed something to do during the pandemic, and I had just decided to take a joke and make it into something. And for some folks out there, that's the most popular thing I've ever put on YouTube, is actually a throwaway episode from that series. The Mysterious Case of Venus's Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And who knew? Who knew?
Yeah.
So the good news is that series will actually finally wrap. The last episode is almost ready to be filmed. So
I can't wait.
Yeah, that's how I ended up doing the solar system stuff.
Now, do you have a history background?
So my undergrad was in history and political science. So that probably explains a lot too.
Who do you take with you for these episodes? And what are their roles?
I have one not unwritten rule, but I have one rule I abide by religiously. I don't climb any of the big western peaks alone. No solo stuff out there. Always have somebody. The person who's been my partner in crime for a majority of those is my one of my best friends, Brett Evenstad. We went to college and we served in the National Guard together. He usually directs those episodes.
Okay.
And then another of our friends, Eric Krause, he does a lot of the sound work and lighting for those in particular. In the early episodes when I was first getting out, my friend Brian Smith really helped do a lot of work getting things, helping me bring this to make it real. And there's if you stick around long enough, you will get roped into a Rooftops of America thing. There is a huge cast of characters. I could just go down the list. My brother Cody, my sister Misty, my sister Tawny. I'm going to forget people. My friend Dan Mayella, my friend Colin, my friend Jess, my cousin Susan. There is. I probably should do an episode just thanking all of them for their time and their grace to put up with my BS and doing, pursuing this adventure.
And you write every script, correct?
Yeah. If there's one thing that is completely my work, it's the scripts.
And do you have like a prompter up there or something?
No.
Or you memorize everything?
Well, this is the movie magic. You only have to memorize a line at a time because you're going to cut it. So if I'm doing it by myself, I'll start working on lines usually about a week out.
Okay.
And just reading through, and then looking like a maniac, saying them out loud in the basement, and then acting out, how I'm going to try to present it on screen. But yes, that's all. I've gotten really good at that part. So there's no prompter, none of that. That's all just delivered. If you ask me to deliver a line, I learn it and I deliver it.
So what can listeners expect? What's next for your channel?
So there's a couple things that are coming up for the channel. You can expect another series of shorts to start coming out. In fact, I just put one out recently. There'll be, the time this probably hits the press, there'll be others. They're going to complement the bigger episodes. I will continue to go back and improve some of my earlier work. I would love to walk away with the series when it's in its completion, where at least every episode, clears that 21, 22-minute mark or longer. So you basically can expect an episode of TV. So places like Kentucky, Missouri, Indiana, Illinois, they'll be refilmed. There's a bunch, probably about 3 of them I'm going to do this summer. I'm going to refilm. There'll be new episodes still coming because I still have, 13 more to go, including 3 territories in the Pacific. So that's coming down the pipe. And then recently, this clever person named Lauren gave me this great idea of taking content and turning it into a potential audio podcast. And I think I'm going to really explore that. I think that could be a really cool addition as well.
And I came up with that idea because after talking to so many high pointers, I know that we drive a lot and we listen to a lot of podcasts. And how cool would it be if on your way to Mount Rogers, you can listen to the Mount Rogers episode?
And there are things that I think that you would get in those podcasts that you'll never see on the YouTube videos because they never made it off the cutting room floor.
Oh, special edition. I like it. Okay. All right.
So there would be a reason to go back and listen because, like I said, certain things just never quite have enough gas to make it. So I get so focused into the core episode that sometimes I miss the bigger beats because I'm so like right now, all I can think of is I need to have Alabama rewritten so I can film it at the end of March. Eric Kelly would tell me that I need to get Utah finished because I've been sitting on it for a year and a half. So yeah, it's so sometimes I think like when like this idea, I'm like, this is a really good idea, and I should make it real. But not but yes, and I need to. That's the thing I need to get into more is instead of but yes, and.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that idea a lot, Lauren. I really do. So thank you for
Good.
that.
So, how has the outdoors and high pointing enriched your life?
It's revalidated how amazing this country is, how many cool stories exist, and how much is out there that's worth celebrating. And so high pointing has rekindled my love of storytelling and, adventuring.
That is very well said. Last question. Can you, the creator of the Rooftops of America YouTube channel, recommend a documentary, podcast, or book on outdoor adventure to the listeners?
So this one is going to be slightly different than I think most people might say.
Okay.
Because there's a particular resource that I absolutely adore when I'm learning about these places that I think more people should have awareness of. Because there are some absolutely fascinating things that you can find there about these places. And it's the Library of Congress archive. It's
Yes.
loc.gov.
Mm-hmm.
You will go down a rabbit hole, but it is so cool to see maps of these places from, in some cases, the 1600s, or finding the journals of like John C. Fremont and his explorations, or reading some of these historical archives about these places and how people perceived them or viewed them, the context they looked at it in. And it really is eye-opening. It gives you a different perspective than I think you would get with, and this is not a slight on the summit reports or the trip reports that people put. Those are incredibly valuable information. But if you want to take a slightly different approach, that would be one of my recommendations to folks, is check out the Library of Congress, loc.gov. You will find yourself down a rabbit hole awfully quick.
That is a great recommendation. And I think when a lot of people hear the Library of Congress, they think of this place they have to physically be at in order to access these resources. But it's actually at your fingertips.
Yeah. And like I said, it is incredible to see. It just provides, like I said, a different perspective on this place that you're going to go check out.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Skye, so much. And for all the listeners, please check out Skye's YouTube channel, Rooftops of America. Check out all those episodes, and of course, subscribe while you're there. Skye, this has been a lot of fun and long awaited. Thank you so much for being on my show.
It was a genuine pleasure. I really appreciate the time.